I'm Robin Carey, and I'm speaking today to Lux Narayan, who's the CEO of Unmetric. Unmetric is a company that's helping big brands understand their competitive positioning in social, and it's an incredibly powerful tool that Unmetric offers up to many, many, many big companies around the world. We're going to talk today, though, about what the power of this kind of analytics, of your kind of analytics, what are the implications of that? What is that doing for companies and brands now that they can see virtually in real time how they're performing with on social and with their fans and with their customers?
Right. I think it's I actually come from the old media world where 15 years ago I used to plan media for large brands, and that was interesting and very different because essentially you're planning media and messaging in an era where it was entirely a monologue, right? So the brand was talking at customers, whether it was television or print. You might have some direct response mechanisms at times, but by and large it was a one-way conversation.
And it was 3 or 4 months old, right? That was what was so amazing about it, right? Yeah.
It sounded also cutting edge at that time.
Yeah.
I think the whole dialogue, the whole conversation economy, first of all, fundamentally transforms everything. Right? The fact that a brand's going to have to speak at a smaller scale with consumers and see responses and then respond back, that in itself changes everything in the nature of communication. And I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg in terms of how marketing teams re-architect themselves to some new realities that they've never embraced before. Even the digital era was largely not about two-way communication. It was about placing impressions on various websites. It was still mass media in a digital context.
Right.
This is the first time that a brand actually has the onus of conversation. And
I love that, the onus of conversation.
It is, right? It's so much easier
I'm sure they perceive it that way, too. Yeah, sorry.
But it requires a different thinking from brands. And I think that translates into a lot of other interesting challenges.
Mm.
Right? We've been saying content is king for years.
Right.
It's truly king now because a brand is a personality that converses with a brand, with a consumer. A brand needs to be engaging, needs to be a raconteur, needs to be a storyteller, a person who says jokes, a humorist, all rolled into one. Right? A real person of sorts. And this is something that not all brands are comfortable with or
Right.
whose DNA naturally aligns with, and therefore brands need to think very differently about what they are. So I think it's fascinating from that prospect. It's also fascinating about the whole micro conversation thing that's happening because suddenly creative is not a 60-second ad or a full-page ad in the New York Times.
Right.
Creative is a tweet or a Facebook post or a video or a picture. It's micro creative.
Right.
Campaigns are micro campaigns. A brand used to do one campaign in 6 months. In the era of television, we do 6 campaigns a month now. Right? It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you use the term creative because finding creativity in this whole environment is it like finding a needle in a haystack? I mean, how do you as a brand pinpoint those conversations that are most important to you and that have the capability with your help of becoming, I don't want to use the word viral, but becoming certainly greater, having greater impact?
I think for starters, you keep your personal inclinations, preferences, biases, and ideas aside to some ways because...
the psychology
right?
of all this. Yeah.
I mean, when I look into our platform and I see data points of content pieces or posts on Facebook or tweets that got amplified and did amazingly well, at times they shock me. And I wonder who in their right mind would have liked this.
Right.
But that's when you realize that the DNA of the consumers of a lot of brands, that the DNA of the new consumers, is very different from the DNA of perhaps how I think. I mean, I'd be the worst person to plan social for a brand today. Right? But I can take refuge in data because if you ask me to do creative with kittens and babies, I would look into data, say on places like our platform, to figure pictures of kittens and babies that around a certain demographic created a certain resonance.
Right.
And the nice thing is, with these micro creatives in this era, it's not the same as television, where you do a television commercial And 2 months after that, you get your reports from Nielsen that tell you your unaided ad awareness and brand awareness and preference scores moved in a certain direction. Over here, that feedback is kind of instantaneous. You put something out there, it works, you get likes, comments, shares, tweets, retweets, repins. There is a conversation economy that's telling you how well you're doing right away.
But how about conversion? I mean, that seems to be, I mean, a lot of the brands I talk to say, oh, you know, we're no longer about Facebook likes, we're really about engagement. But then when you press them and say, well, how do you define engagement? Well, you know, either they don't want to say, or the metrics are somewhat squishy, you know, sort of, or you're using a metric that their agencies provided them, right? So, you know, so there's that sort of nebulous measurement out there. But then when you ask about ROI, that still seems to be elusive for a lot of brands. Is anyone connecting that dot?
I don't think anyone is, wholly and successfully connecting that dot.
Right.
I would argue about how important, it is important to define ROI, but in certain contexts, I also find that maybe we don't need to obsess about it as much and or in the direction we do right now. So we've always lived with that old adage that I know half my advertising is working, but I don't know which half, right?
Yeah.
And if you're living with that for 95% or 90% of your budget, it's kind of funny that you're going to evaluate digital and social with a slightly different yardstick. But it's not unusual because it's kind of rooted in human nature that when you see something that has so many metrics,
right.
You look at social, you can look at it for half an hour and come up with 50 different metrics.
Right.
It should be easy finding something as simple as ROI, considering you've got 50 metrics. They should all fit in somewhere. But the truth is, sometimes it doesn't fit.
Right.
And actually, if you look back on it, the roots of ROI is actually in industrial engineering, and I train as a mechanical engineer. And the analog of ROI in an industrial engineering context is to say, I've got a production floor with 4 assembly lines. What's the ROI of the 5th guy on the 4th assembly line? And you can't find that out. So I think you need different ways of looking at it. True, you need to know the returns on your efforts, but it's not necessarily maybe from an ROI lens. Maybe it's from establishing correlation. Right? So if you find that engagement, and I wholly agree with you, it's still a very squishy metric at this time, but whatever that squishy metric is, if you find that a certain input translates into some good squishy engagement metric, which has some correlation with propensity to purchase, which has therefore an implication on sales, that's a starting point.
Right, right.
So it requires tying in the offline and the social worlds in proprietary researches that stitches that. Starbucks has this famous study that found out that the average fan consumed more lattes than the average non-fan. And that for them was a rationale to invest resources into getting fans. It works.
Yep.
What is the ROI on that guy? Is it $2.30 or $2.40? It doesn't matter at this point. As long as you establish there is value in going after that person.
I know that, one of the reasons I always enjoy talking to you is that we're both very concerned with education and how do we educate the market certainly to use Unmetric better. In my case, certainly to have more readers, coming to our site. That's my conversion statistic. But what do you think are the big gaps in understanding, particularly at the CMO level, and particularly about data now? What are they still not understanding about the implications of social?
I think at a fundamental level, everyone's kind of extending existing practices into social. Right, so it's still being seen in a lot of places.
They're still talking about campaigns and
yeah, it's not treated separately. It's kind of seen as an appendage. Like digital was something that someone in the media planning department would do digital. If you look at all the people who work in digital today, a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them used to work in traditional media. And the natural assumption in most companies is, okay, social, let's get the digital guy. Social is a lot more closer to digital, let's get the digital guy on it. I think it requires a different kind of thinking. Right? When I see the kind of platforms my kids embrace, for example, or what they think of Snapchat and Vine, I can't believe half of those things because I don't relate to it.
Right.
I think that there's a different way of thinking about social that requires maybe new blood and a new kind of DNA in companies, and not just an extension of, okay, here's another thing which is going to get 5% of our budget, and let's get the existing people to think about it. Let's get tweaks of our existing creative and put it out there like we do with everything else. I think too many marketers are looking at it or started looking at it as extensions. But increasingly, we're seeing interesting campaigns that were designed, made for social. And to some extent, the proliferation of many platforms and the adoption of many platforms also kind of lends a landscape for that, right? Because in the mass media world, we think of a multimedia campaign as TV, print, and radio.
Right.
And now you have marketers thinking of a multi-channel campaign as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Right.
Right. So they're thinking around the media and saying, let's think around what this media affords.
And it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's really not about that. And particularly now that you introduce mobile, it's like, oh, is that another channel, or is this actually something fundamentally different?
Yeah.
Well, this has been, I'm not surprised to say, a really
Always fun with you.
fascinating conversation. I know that you've got one of the best ideas of what's going on in the market, and it's a great service that Unmetric provides, a great platform. So keep up the good work, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Always will. Thank you. And I hope you're right, as you usually are. So.